This man is about to say the most absolute insane things about Starfield and its story DLC. It's just, we'll get to it in a second. A couple of months ago, a modding team crafted one of my favorite experiences of the year. It was a love letter to fans of Fallout and arguably rivals a lot of the AAA games I've played the past few years. Of course, it had issues, a lot of technical bugs, but there was brilliance with the design of the world, the main story was well crafted with more than enough surprises and decisions, the factions had a surprising amount of depth, there was tons of unique weapons, armor, and other gear, probably well over 100 hours worth of content. All of this was free, and hampered by the fact that Bethesda broke Fallout 4, something that still has never been fixed months later. I bring up Fallout London as an example that Bethesda's design has stagnated to a point that modding teams are putting out products that rival the paid stuff that they're crafting. Shattered Space was, on multiple occasions, compared to a traditional BGS experience, with Todd Howard even saying it was similar to Far Harbor, and the truth is, it was not. I reflected this opinion on Twitter with my first impressions that Shattered Space felt like cut content from the base game. It truly feels that sometime in development of Starfield they felt that they had the necessary content that they wanted on day one and took this chunk out to use later as a paid expansion. $30 might I add. House of Alrune was mysteriously absent from the base game, and based on what I just played, it feels as if this started out as a giant side quest that turned into not much more than that. It's the only thing that explains this. And hey, maybe it's wrong, but Dazra is a decent sized city with an open world that feels just like every location in the base game. You get 5 hours of main story, 5 to 10 more of side content, barely any new weapons, they're mostly reskins, no armor that was worth touching, no new skills, no new gameplay mechanics, no real companions, nothing for your ships or halves. It's pathetic. Which maybe explains why Bethesda wasn't so keen on giving out any review codes for this expansion ahead of time. And I said as much in my own review of this expansion, but today it's become quite obvious. This misfire is not just a sentiment that I or maybe yourself holds, but most of the Starfield player base. A player base that, might I add, was already pretty torn over this game, and many just chose not to even bother with more Starfield, but those brave souls that coughed up $30+ mostly feels anger with what they just played. Myself, I feel concerned as Bethesda seems to be lost. Now, in terms of Starfield's performance right now on the Microsoft Play Store most played games for Xbox and such, it's actually not even in the top 25 so far for Starfield. It's sitting right around 26. Maybe that goes up in the coming days, but definitely an indicator that there's not exactly a large portion of the player base going out of the way to play this expansion. And if you actually check SteamDB right now, it peaked at around 21,000 players on Monday when the DLC did release, and it's slowly already declining. It got around 15,000, its 24-hour peak, 21,000 overall is its peak. So that is, it doubled its player base, so some say that's a success, but I mean, the grand scheme of things, Fallout 4, when that TV show launched, when they launched that next-gen update, which was right around the 22nd, the player base skyrocketed. And then you look to Cyberpunk 2077, when they had their first expansion release, and Update 2.0, which released right alongside it, the player base exploded to over 250,000 players. That's huge. And let's be honest, Starfield didn't start off with 0 players. It had 330,000 players. These guys just aren't coming back, and that is for a reason. Another game, Elden Ring. Great example of this. When Shadow of the Erdtree released, it was over 750,000. Obviously, it's a little different, you know, From Software, top of this industry, but still, the point is that Starfield's DLC has not been met to really any interest from the gaming industry because people just don't care about this game. And then those who actually did even bother to play it, well, look at what they got. Mostly negative. 34% of these reviews out of 1,600 are positive. That is a nightmare scenario for a studio like Bethesda. And it shows that people overall just do not like this DLC. And if you get to the nit and grit of these reviews, it's even funny. The positive ones are negative. I love this one. The most helpful review in the past day. The story is boring as fuck. Would recommend if you have insomnia and need to work the next day. And then even this one, another positive, which says it's more Starfield, neither good nor bad. I just love how they give it a positive, but I guess that's just Steam's system. Just meh. Not bad enough to not recommend it, but also not good enough at a full price. Wait for a sale. Another person saying not worth the price, no new mechanics or gameplay additions. This is easily one of the worst DLCs I've ever played. And I think you gotta really understand the landscape of DLCs. We had Shadow of the Erdtree. We had Phantom Liberty. Those set a new example. And even Bethesda in years past, They had some fantastic story expansions. Everybody talks about Far Harbor, but this is no Far Harbor. It's a laughingstock. And for some reason, the only people that doesn't understand that seems to be a couple of Starfield supporters and Bethesda themselves. Disappointing, can't recommend this, sorry BGS, Starfield and now Shattered Space feels like a game made by a bunch of retired in-place managers doing the bare minimum to meet requirements, no new features, no fixes, and the fact that the game is still a boring mess, not even an attempt to fix the game's core issues. The writing of this game is just awful. Congrats, Todd, you handcrafted a planet this time. Even the positive reviews, again, are all negative comments. They say less is more, and with Shattered Space, it's true. Bethesda giving you less while asking you for more money. And yeah, that price point of $30 is just absolutely ridiculous, especially with you only getting about 10 to 15 hours worth of content. I don't even care if you absolutely love this expansion. It should not be $30 at all. But even on the Starfield subreddit, these are the most staunchest supporters of this game, and it's the same thing. People are just like, wow, mostly negative rating on Steam. Some of the top comments here. I won't go into full summary of the DLC, but I think it's just a shame that one place we wanted to go for an entire year was so underwhelmingly delivered. We get a chance to visit the capital of this mysterious third faction and surprise half their main cities blown up. They have no unique faction ships yards. They have the same franchise stores as everyone else in the settled system. Clothing is exactly the same, with a couple pieces being altered slightly, including the weapons. No unique weapons other than essentially reskins. There's none of the mystery we saw in New Atlantis' embassy, none of the poison trees which cause hallucinations, blah, and they go on and on. I've been addicted to Cyberpunk the last few months. Going from that Shattered Space made me realize how bland the writing is in Starfield. It's like it was made for kids, honestly. I agree. Well, we waited a whole year and got 10 hours of what seriously feels like cut content from the base game, a sentiment I think we all have. They also repeatedly compared it to Far Harbor, which is one of the best DLC Bethesda ever made. There's almost nothing actually new here, just reskins of pre-existing items. Yeah, it's dropping because people are finishing and going, that's it. Like Starfield SS starts well, and then you look around and realize what could have been. It's overpriced for the content it delivers. Shattered Space, to me, was a massive disappointment, and it goes on and on. These reviews from the most staunchest supporters of Starfield are absolutely brutal. And hey, look, we'll see what happens. Maybe Bethesda responds to some of these Steam reviews. They did it before, remember that? They responded to people saying that the game was boring in the initial launch. This was from their customer support team. Some of the Starfield planets are meant to be emptied by design, but that's not boring, which I found that absolutely hysterical when they did that, responding to those reviews that way. And I truly feel like Bethesda actually feels that way based on everything that we're about to go over and the things that they've said in the last couple of months. But the reality is, I mean, the Steam page is mixed for a reason. 59%, under 60% of people actually enjoyed Starfield. That says a lot, and the fact that Bethesda is not learning any lessons from that, it's startling to me. It makes me extremely worried for everything that they do moving forward. Now, to Metacritic, it just continues to get worse. Shattered Space has a 54. This is lower than Fallout 76, just to understand how bad this actually is. And these reviews are, again, extremely brutal. Metro Game Central gave it a 40, the exact opposite of what Starfield needed, with a DLC expansion that magnifies the parent's game's failings and sidelines its more positive elements. The Guardian, the problem is very little of what you asked for turns out to be any fun. Fetch quests that offer next to no payoff, lots of that in the side content, are compounded by annoying travel. You have to make an unappealing choice between the vein-popping frustration of trying to drive across the craggy, impassable, boulder-strewn landscape, or giving up and schlepping there on foot. And yeah, that land vehicle that we got in Starfield, say what you will, but the game's maps just were not built around it, and it shows when you're trying to traverse the terrain of Shattered Space and Dazra and Varun Kai. It doesn't work all that well, and often I found that extremely frustrating myself. Game ran. At times I was blown away by Shattered Space, beautifully rendered new areas. Again, that's the only compliment I can give to this game. It looks beautiful at times, not just except for when you get in front of players' faces or other characters and then you see their horrific wooden facial animations. But other times my immersion was ruined by annoying progression killing quest bugs. I have a lot of that, including enemy AI just not working at all, and weird graphical oddities. The DLC is uneven to say the least, and that's something Starfield fans should take into consideration when deciding if they want to play this. And the reviews go on and on. You get that sentiment. There are some positive ones, one in which from Xbox era that gave it a 90. I think they gave the game a 9.7, so I guess not too surprising that there are some people that absolutely love this. And I think that if you absolutely love that base game of Starfield, I think a lot of them are more than satisfied with that. But I think with this being so divisive, I think a lot more people just are unhappy with this and think that Starfield needed to have a bigger change. It needed to have a No Man's Sky Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty revamp, and Bethesda just doesn't seem interested in that at all. Now, from some YouTubers, we saw again more brutal reviews. Luke Stevens, he said, finished Shattered Space accidentally in an afternoon. Again, this is short. It's about 5 hours of the main story. I thought there'd be a lot more, but the main story is very short. Simply, it's more Starfield. The writing is painfully dry. I almost fell asleep so many times. The characters act like they don't want to be there, and the lack of optimization is painful, like the base game. Mr. Matty Plays, he just interviewed Todd Howard over the summer, one of the most staunchest supporters of Bethesda, but he does often offer very fair criticism of this company. He said, Shattered Space is not good at all. The exploration is still somehow extremely lacking. The main story is ridiculously short. It ran like crap on the Xbox Series performance mode. I said this in my own review. I had that 60 FPS mode running, and it felt like the game was running often at about 20 when you're traversing the open world. There isn't any new companions, and Andreja barely reacts to what happens around her despite how the base game builds her story, and the list goes on and on. To be clear, because I know how Twitter is, I enjoyed Starfield a lot at launch. I like it a lot more than Fallout or Elder Scrolls No, but I put over 100 hours in it, and yeah, people were coming after him for these opinions that he shared here. Why do we as gamers listen to one person's opinion and make it shape our perception of something? I will never understand this. People go and play the DLC yourself and form your own opinion. Stop being sheep, people. Well, there's a 36% rating on Starfield's Steam page, so I think that those reviews say a lot, along with the Metacritic reviews. I mean, if overwhelmingly people do not like this DLC, I think that says a lot about the quality of this content. I'm sure that there's going to be a small portion of people that absolutely continue to suck off Bethesda and their game design, which is stagnated, but I find it ridiculous in my opinion, and all it does is continue to let this company be complacent when they should not be. They should be freaking out. They should be looking at their game design and realizing this is not working. And then I love this comment. Someone speedran the main quest without stopping to talk to anyone else. It's a 5-hour main story, and that's being generous. I just... play the expansion for yourself if you want to, but there isn't much here, and what's here, it's laughable in my opinion. But ultimately, all these individuals that want to go to the defense of Bethesda can't change this reality, and this 42% is now a lot worse, and it's mostly negative now. But we did see Emil Pagliarulo. He is one of the lead designs at Bethesda. He's done a lot of the writing for these games and been, let's just say, he's been very controversial with a lot of the things he said over the last couple of years in terms of how he approaches game writing. And Emil said this about Andreja and Shattered Space, which I find hilarious now in hindsight since I've already played the entire expansion, which is about 10 to 15 hours. He said, clearly Andreja will have a particular investment and opinions about the events of Varun Kai. There's no difference between her and any other companion. There's no unique perspective or quests or any connection to Varun Kai. And I think that's the frustrating part for so many people, especially when you're comparing this expansion to Far Harbor, an expansion that you had a companion like Nick Valentine that had such a massive connection of the story and characters, and they utilize that to its fullest potential. Here, though, they don't do that with what is considered probably the best companion in the base game. But Emil had a lot more to say in an interview with Games Radar, and it gets absolutely so much more insane with these remarks. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but what is as Starfield Shattered Space launches? And yeah, design director Emil Pagliarulo on how Bethesda went from selling horse armor to visiting distant planets. And this is where it starts. He says, the development of new IP was always going to be an ambitious, disruptive undertaking, especially when it comes to the perceived cost of a new Elder Scrolls or Fallout, but Pagliarulo is confident that Starfield is following the right trajectory. Oh, really? Okay. He says, I think in a lot of ways, Starfield is the hardest thing Bethesda has ever done. We pushed ourselves to make something totally different to just jam into an Xbox, the biggest, richest space simulation RPG anyone could imagine. I don't care what you say, but Mass Effect on so many different levels is so much more grander than everything that Starfield is. That game came out a decade plus ago, that trilogy, and I still hold it so much higher regards than this. But he does go on. He says, what we pulled off makes Starfield something of a technical marvel, especially with that game engine. Okay, I can see that perspective. It's also in a lot of ways the best game we've ever made. Okay, maybe from a gameplay perspective, but people love these Bethesda RPGs for the storytelling, the writing, which is not there at all with Starfield. And in many ways, it pales in comparison in so many different ways to just Skyrim and Fallout 4. But on a technical side, sure, the combat is better than they've ever done before. And they improved on a lot of the other aspects of their game design. But in this age, I mean, you're looking at the rest of the industry and developers are doing laps around you. The way that I see Bethesda, they're like that guy who's opening that champagne bottle, celebrating all the way at the bottom as there's so many other individuals ahead of them. That's Bethesda modern day nowadays. But for us, most importantly, Starfield has its own unique personality and now sits right next to Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. I would love to know how he came to this conclusion, because there's nothing about this lore, the universe, that is interesting. And say what you will, but Starfield borrows a hell of a lot from Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. He does continue. He said, this article says that Bethesda is proud of Starfield and confident in its future. So if you were looking at them and hoping that they'd be, hoping to change people's minds about this game, they seem to be more than happy with how this game was perceived, which I find laughable. They view the broad conversations that emerged after its launch as proof the studio is right to try something new. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but what is, we created a new IP from the ground up and an experience that is absolutely unique on consoles. Again, the concept has been done by many other development teams. No Man's Sky is a great example, and they did such a better job at it. But obviously it doesn't have RPG or writing and stuff like that, I suppose. And I'm not saying Starfield is better or worse than any other game, just different in what we offer. It's that weird Bethesda blend of immersion, action, and RPG, but also different to Bethesda others' RPGs. Paculero says, Starfield is developing its own unique fan base. It's much smaller than all these other franchises, I'll promise you that. It's big and it's growing. Bethesda used to feel like the studio of Elder Scrolls, then it was the studio you'd associate with Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Now it's Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Starfield. Bethesda Game Studios, Big 3. It's not Big 3, it's Big 2, and that's it. Starfield should probably not even get a new sequel after this, and if it does, you're going to be met to a lot of because people don't care about this franchise. They want Bethesda to get back to the Elder Scrolls. They want them to get back to Fallout, just because people want to see more for those franchises that actually have interesting lore, interesting factions, interesting characters, interesting everything. That is not here with Starfield, which is just light expanse, and much worse at it, in my opinion. But this response from Emil isn't surprising. Todd Howard earlier this year said as much to Kinda Funny Games, in which he just completely missed the mark in terms of addressing the criticism with Starfield. And he said that the reason why the game was so divisive, why if you look at those Steam reviews, it's 59% out of 100,000 reviews. Todd said at the time in May to Kinda Funny Games, it was too different than you've seen from us in the past. That's his feeling about all of the negativity that they've gotten about Starfield, which again completely misses the mark. And this is what his specific remarks he said. He said, we see a lot of players saying, this is what I want out of a Bethesda game, which is to explore a world in a certain way, and Starfield didn't give me that. I prefer the way it's done in Fallout. And although Todd thinks that it's perfectly understandable, he says it's just not the experience Starfield sets out to provide. I do think for us, particularly me, going into a science fiction game, I want to be able to land on all the planets. I want the game to say yes to us, knowing that the content is going to be different than you've seen from us in the past, and that's fine. It's just the execution was not there. The thing that Bethesda doesn't understand is that standards have changed. 10 or so years ago, Bethesda was at the top of the industry. Nowadays, Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077 set new standards in different regards, and Bethesda, they just continue to iterate on their original dated formula. People look at things like the technical constraints with these games, with Starfield, as something that is extremely frustrating. People are tired of it. They're tired of all these loading screens. They're also tired of the writing, which continues to get worse in these Bethesda experiences. And I think that Bethesda has proven that they can create great environments, but the actual world building, the lore of these universes, they have not been able to do that in a long, long time. So Todd Howard, what he says right here, it's just not surprising. And then Emil is continuing to parrot this months later, and it really says a lot about Bethesda, and it makes me extremely concerned about what we're going to be getting with the Elder Scrolls 6, especially if this is their mindset. But getting back to Emil's interview, he does continue. He says, any Bethesda developer who has been around since the Horse Armor days knows that by this point, if we understand one thing, it's DLC. Well, this proves they don't. That's not to say we're on autopilot and don't think about it now. It means we still think about it and have probably thought about it more than any other studio since those early days. I don't believe that for a second. I think CDPR has proven that they are the masters at DLC, especially in recent years. Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine, Phantom Liberty, all fantastic experiences. Even Elden Ring recently, Shadow of the Archery, great job by that team. He does continue, he says, and I think the result of all the contemplating is that we've had a pretty good handle on how to plug new content into our huge games. And then later, he says, Bethesda looked inward when it was time to make Shattered Space. He says, always keep your hits in mind. For Shattered Space, Fallout 4's Far Harbor was the real touchstone in terms of landmass size, questlines, quality. That was a really solid DLC, so I'd say we started there. Although, one of the big issues is the main man behind that left Bethesda a number of months ago. So expecting Far Harbor from this Bethesda team was probably silly on our part, and maybe even myself. But then, as happens when you have something special, the project takes on its own life, calling this special. Okay, it becomes its own thing, it exists in its own pocket of awesome outside of comparison to something else. And when that happens, that's when you dive in fully committed to the vision, and your gut is just telling you it's going to be good because it was made with so much passion. Passion does not equal fucking quality, Emil. There's a reason why you have this. There's a reason. Passion does not lead to automatic success, and that's so naive, so dumb in my opinion that he said that. He does continue. This is how he finishes this interview. He says, I feel great about Starfield's future. I don't. I'm excited about the stuff we're working on now and the stuff we've got coming past that, and it's insane what our mod community has already accomplished. And there's been some leaks indicating maybe they're going to have a Starborn expansion next year, and some of the data mining of this expansion, Shattered Space, showed that there was probably other stuff that they didn't get released in time because they rushed this out. And it feels like Shattered Space probably needed a lot more time in the oven for Bethesda to cook, and it probably wouldn't have improved the actual, review scores we see now, but it probably would have had more content at the very least. And specifically, this is what Tim Lamb, one of the Bethesda executive producers who worked on Starfield, said a while ago. He was interviewed. He was asked, you mentioned ancient ruins and lost technologies. Does that mean we can expect new gameplay mechanics or systems being introduced in this DLC? This does not at all happen in Shattered Space right now. Tim Lamb says, absolutely, we've added a few new mechanics that we're really excited about. For example, there are new zero-gravity combat scenarios that really change the dynamics of how you approach fights. There's like little bubbles that you can jump into, and they're never really utilized in the actual story outside of maybe a mission or two, which calling that a new gameplay mechanic it's a stretch. It adds a layer of strategy that wasn't there before. We've also introduced new ship customization options. This isn't here at all, so this is probably coming down the road, probably as a free update or something, which allow players to really tailor their vessels to their playstyle. In the exploration front, there are new tools and gadgets that will help players interact with the environment in deeper, more meaningful ways. And again, none of that here is here because Bethesda probably rushed this Shattered Space expansion out the door. But again, I don't think that this was at all going to change reviews, even if this content was there. Bethesda has proven one thing over the last year in these interviews from Emil and Todd, and it's that they don't understand or care to understand the criticism that they've received with Starfield. They continue to say that the reception that they got was more than good enough for them, and thumbs up, we're moving on, which I think is extremely sad and disappointing because Bethesda needs to be better. The industry is doing laps around them, and they just don't seem to care at all. I found this rather baffling also. Todd Howard in a recent interview said that Bethesda games are irresponsibly large, and he explained why. He says, we cut very little from our games, and I think that really says a lot about Bethesda's design, the standards that they have within, and I do think that they should be cutting a lot more from their games. They should have better standards, but for some reason we just continue down this road of mediocrity with this company. And I think people need to understand the traditional Bethesda experience that we just got with Shattered Space was our first time that we got anything like that since really Far Harbor back in 2016, 2015. It's been a long time. People have to understand Nuka World was more gameplay focused, a little bit more different than anything Bethesda had done with Fallout 4. Then after that, we got Fallout 76, which it's its own thing. And then Starfield, which is their procedurally generated giant, which everything really feels like it should have just been in one single universe with 10 planets to explore. It would have been a much better product in my opinion, a lot less messy, but the problem is Bethesda wants to be irresponsibly large. They don't at all want to set standards. And it seems like whatever Todd says goes, which maybe that's not good nowadays. Maybe they need to change. Maybe they need to blow things up. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen under this current management or regime at Bethesda or even Xbox, which is unfortunate in my opinion. Anyway, Starfield Shattered Space expansion, $30, feels like cut content, and right now has a mostly negative rating on Steam with only about 33% of users rating it positively. Even from critics, it's about a 54 on Metacritic. That is as bad as it gets, and it feels like the biggest compliment that Bethesda is receiving living with Shattered Space, even from its staunchest supporters, is that it's just a little bit boring, which I think that really says a lot. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on Starfield Shattered Space. What do you think about the reception that Bethesda is receiving and their response to it? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.